Hi, I'm Arthur, and this is a video about D&D and not Warhammer, which, fun fact about me, I've been playing Warhammer and wargames for a little under 7 to 8 years now, but I've been playing tabletop RPGs for well over 15 at minimum. I started when I was really young. I was the Eternal Game Master then, and I am still the Eternal Game Master now for all of my friends. Aside from a few scant times where I am allowed to act as an elf on my own terms, I have been running games for quite some time. The longest running game I have ever done lasted about 2 or 3 years to my recollection. It was pretty fun, involving some pretty fun people. Me, reminiscing aside, I have experienced editions of D&D starting with Pathfinder and 3.5, but I have played everything from AD&D to modern 5th edition. Yes, I have learned Thaco. No, it is still as hard to explain to people. Seeing Baldur's Gate 3 kind of pop its head up lately made me feel a bit reminiscent over my past adventures, so I went back and read some of the older books. For the uninformed, the technical original version of Dungeons & Dragons, the Edition 0, if you will, was a tabletop wargame by the name of Chainmail. Now, it did have a bit of a you play a character in the army you are running type vibe, but after tracing Chainmail through the years and getting D&D proper, you realize that some of the most staple monsters in D&D are just bizarre. So I'm going to cover a few of the original designs, looking at the art, and discuss what I think of them and a few of the origins of where they came from. It's more just like I'm taking you all to a fucked up zoo and we can all just point and laugh at the weird monsters that are in front of us. Let's start with one of my favorites, the fucking owlbear.
Owlbears!
The owlbears!
What's the matter, you?
Owlbears!
Owlbears! He's talking owlbears!
If you like Auntie Donna, we can be friends. Without gushing too much, I adore the owlbear. It's the most D&D monster you could ever have. In the original lore, they are creatures created by demented wizards that ended up being murdered by said creatures. It's kind of hilarious to think about that they ended up going off on their own and creating a small ecosystem of owlbears. The modern interpretation of the owlbear is more of just an animal that just so happens to be slightly magical, but is of an animal-like disposition. They are usually true, neutral, and alignment, but let me introduce you to the original owlbear. This thing will fuck you up and eat your family. Known for being inherently evil, this thing apparently went out of its way to kill anything it sees. They travel in small gangs to commit acts of wanton violence on unsuspecting passerbys. Just look at it. It radiates pure evil. With special attacks like Hug, it was known to be particularly dangerous. If you've never played OG D&D with an OG GM, the older game was more about strategy than it was about actually fighting. Dying in old D&D was super easy, so you had to hide from these kinds of major threats if you had any chance of survival. So it's funny to see this creature be such of a threat back then, and still kind of be a threat now, but more of a if we're level 5 we can kill it type threat. Though the next creature we are going to talk about is a lot less known, and a lot less used to my knowledge, I really love it. This is a Zorn. They have 3 legs, 3 eyes, 1 mouth, and 3 arms. They can surf through solid dirt and do not really want to cause anyone harm, unless you have shiny rocks on you. Yeah, these things are earth elemental adjacent. They just want to eat precious rocks. So if you feed them some gold coins, they often leave you alone. The bigger and stronger Zorn might attack you and instead try to consume your items by force, but it is particularly rare. They are a classic D&D monster through and through. I use them a lot in my own games as a major set piece, where they just ask if you have any gems, and if you say no, they just kinda smell the air to see if you're lying, and then leave you alone if they don't see anything. They do have 5e stats, weirdly enough. I think they are a good ambivalent force to put into most modern games, as just a cute little, oh hey, they just want the rocks type moment. Now we have another classic, the Roper. It's a lamprey-like slug that covers itself in rocks to pretend to be a stalagmite or a stalactite in caves that adventurers go to. When the adventurers fall asleep near a roper, they just get dragged into its lamprey-style mouth while they're asleep. I usually see these things get paired up with another D&D monster called a cloaker, though that one is a bit more obscure. It's more of a giant, evil, leathery bag with a face that disguises itself like an octopus on a stone wall. A lot of old school GMs I have worked with use these two in like a symbiotic relationship, because the cloaker will drop down and wrap around a person's face so they make no noise. Then the roper would pull them into its mouth, bite them in half, and give the other half to the cloaker to eat. Is it dark? Yes. Is it effective? Also yes. Did I die too at once? Oh, you bet your sweet ass I did. I had a particularly malicious GM. He is probably one of my best friends, to be honest. The dude had a necromancer make an army because he found a way to make 3 undead out of 1 body. So a month goes by and he had like 100 undead raid us. It was really fucked. So he kept using the Roper Cloaker combo on us, so eventually we just lined the entirety of our clothing with like steel needles just to ward them off if they ever grabbed onto us. To kind of give you an idea, this GM that I'm talking about, he did those kinds of traps a lot. So if we fell asleep, it was a really 1-2 punch combo if we weren't prepared. It's a good trap for new players if you want to really run a hard D&D encounter. I got 2 more monsters I want to cover, and one is very specific, but second last dude I want to cover was created to stop the mage fighter power gap from being a thing. So in early D&D, and to some degree now still, how D&D parties usually go is from level 1 you have the melee classes, and they are amazing starting off. Decent health for level 1 encounters, they have decent damage, and they just get better in sort of a linear way. But magic users are horrendous to start. They have about the same damage as a fighter, but they have significantly less health and significantly less equipment. They don't do much of anything other than like die horribly to a single stab from a goblin. But that's when you realize that a D&D wizard at high levels is wielding the fucking anti-life equation at that point. High-level magic casters are just a little hard to balance. Because, for lack of a better way to describe it, Gandalf solos the whole fellowship if he really wanted to. There is a reason for that, but because that exists, it leaves room for silliness. Like this goofy looking asshole. If you know what this is, you have experienced the most wondrous moment in RP history before. This is a flail snail. It is a 10-foot snail that has complete immunity to all forms of magic. And here's the punchline. It has 4 mace heads for eye stalks. It's another OG monster created specifically to humble cocky magic users. I love this design like you wouldn't believe, and I have thrown flail snails at my parties so much. They are fucking bananas. They just beat the shit out of the wizards. It's so funny to see wizards cast his instant kill max level heightened maximized phantasmal killer to have it bounce off and do absolutely nothing. It's a good way to put party members in their place if they are getting a little bit too steamrolly with magic gear. And also a good way to encourage creative play so you can have people find out the best way to solve the puzzle that is this big feller in a combat scenario with 4 wizards. Speaking of wizards, one of the most dangerous creatures in original D&D was the Mind Flayer. And unlike every other creature that looks a little goofy from its original interpretation, and the flail snail, the Mind Flayer has definitely retained a lot of its original aspects in terms of art and design. Sure, it's a bit more refined, but this is where it all started. Subterranean entities that simply wish to harvest humans as cattle. No Githyanki, no Githzerai. They were just weird underground monsters. And I think they are inherently an interesting look into the designs of the past, because the original D&D was based around what Gary Gygax and company liked. See, they wanted to model their tabletop war games to have fantasy elements, because Warhammer Fantasy wasn't a thing yet. So, every one of them, aside from Gary, enjoyed Tolkien, so they wanted to incorporate a lot of his literature. That ended up being a reverberating idea as it rippled through to AD&D, where they actually incorporated a lot of other fictitious ideas into it that were generated outside of just the original source materials they were pulling from, with the original settings of Blackmoor and Greyhawk being invented as the original pseudo-module/campaign settings. You had boundless creativity, so you'll see a lot of creatures from other works of fiction be brought in. The influences of Howard Philip Lovecraft on D&D don't just stop at the Mind Flayers looking weirdly like Cthulhu, though that may be a topic for another day. I love the brain-eating tentacle faces, the psychic madness, the reference to eldritch horrors and squids. They are incredibly cute in terms of their design, but so is everything in this video, to be honest. I decided to leave my comfort zone for once, and instead of doing Warhammer-centric content, I tried another tabletop game. 5e is pretty popular right now, so I thought I'd swing that way and see what you guys think. It's a topic I am incredibly passionate about, as I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, and Numenera for most of my life. So if you want to see more D&D related content, let me know in the comments, and also let me know what you'd like to know about. I had a few ideas about covering its history with wargames and how that links up with Warhammer, but I want to see if there's an audience for it. Aside from that, I would like to thank my channel members for keeping me fed, and if you want to see my content early or see exclusive content, then become a channel member today. Before I go, I just want to say, look at this beholder. Look at him. This is where they started. It looks like an evil meatball.